Okay, welcome everybody. We are doing an NA IPA Brew Day. That is a zero point 0.5. And yes, you heard that right, a zero point 0.5. And did I say it right, guys?
Yes,
Because
you
I've
did.
kind of screwed
Well
it.
done.
Yes, so with practice, I can learn. This is going to be awesome. I think you're going to really enjoy it. And for those of you that happen to catch our attempt to live stream this, which was very disappointing, for some reason, technically it just failed. So we're going to switch to cameras, keep going. My motto is you always have a backup, and so we've got that. So we're going to switch to cameras and get this. It's still going to be a lot of fun. So first of all, I am not at home. I am in Asheville, North Carolina. But let me hand the mic over to the guy who actually it's his garage that we're brewing in. So Josh, if you don't mind, I'm going to get out of the screen and you describe where we are.
Yeah, welcome to my home and my garage. Again, we're in Asheville, North Carolina. My name is Josh Brewer, and we are brewing an NA beer. This is, I've brewed one before earlier in the year that went really, really well. And here I am again with even more friends than I had before in April. So, and we've got Doug here that's decided to film us. So this is pretty exciting, I think, for all of us. So welcome. I'm just going to run through like fast, recipe, and I'll talk along the way as we're starting to like mill in and whatever. But I'll just give you a fast blow by blow of what I came up with. So NA IPA. There's Breeze 2 row. There's some Weyermann Munich malt. There's some C pills from Breeze, some white Breeze wheat, some flake barley, flaked oats, and some C60 from Breeze as well. So there's not a lot of malt. Kind of like my joke is this beer starts at where other beers finish. So this beer starts at about 1017 in gravity and then only moves a couple of points to about 15 to give you that, like the one that I did in April was 0.3. So anywhere between like 0.3 and 0.5, obviously, from an NA standpoint. Hops, Cascade, Citra, and Belma. Like a normal IBU hopping rate, so about 38 to 40 IBUs. And then a really big heavy hit of dry hopping with all three of those hops as well.
Yeast?
From yeast. Thank you, Julia. Yeast. Yeah, yeast is, so what we're going for with like mash is like the super high temperature mash that creates a bunch of complex sugars that the yeast really can't eat, but we're also using like an NA strain from White Labs, and it's the attenuation is very, very low, so it doesn't eat much sugar, but we also made a lot of complex sugars that it can't eat. So it's kind of like both of those combined into one gives you this low alcohol. Mash is only about 30 minutes and boil is only about 30 minutes. So just make sure when you're calculating IBUs that you put in 30 instead of 60. And I'll talk about it later, but I do have some pH balancing with lactic acid at the end of boil and in whirlpool. That is an addition to keep that under the regulation is under 4.6, but I went even lower to like that 3.8 to 4 pH. And that is just keeping microbes down to a very minimum to be safe. And we can talk about some other safety issues as we go through the brew day. So
Great.
Megan.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Hey, everyone. It's great to meet you. Great to be here. My name is Megan Anderson. I'm the founder and CEO of Aficionado Certification Program. We are the world's first professional level training and certification program for alcohol-free and non-alcoholic AFNA adult beverage. So it's an exciting opportunity for me because as I met Josh actually as an experiment in bringing this exact concept to the homebrewing community, thanks to Julia. She invited me to speak at the homebrew conference in San Diego at HomebrewCon earlier this year, and I thought, well, I've done this on a professional scale, but it would be nice to see how we do this at home. You know, truly being able to integrate these offerings at a homebrew level is very exciting as the moderation movement begins to show quite a bit of interest. And we saw that this morning when we started to live stream, and that's really exciting. So today, I really want to show how we're really making a beer with a restricted amount of alcohol in it And so there are some differences, which is why we felt the need to create a training program around that. So what we're going to do is highlight what those differences are and what you can expect and process. Today we're going to be using a biological process, which is a really exciting opportunity. We're not really doing any dilution or anything like that. We're not using evaporation. So just to show that you can make this at home, I want to encourage all of you today after watching this to give that a try, and that you can make really tasty and delicious 0.5 beers at home to enjoy, and what I like to think of as being able to drink more beer. So welcome. We look forward to doing this with you and answering your questions, and I'll turn it over to Julia now.
I'm out of the picture. Thank you, Megan and Josh. I'm ready to brew. Wow. Just so quick introduction, Julia Hers, Executive Director of the American Homebrewers Association. And Megan's right, with one of the best attended seminars and sessions at HomebrewCon in 2023 for the AHA's National Conference was this NA beer session where Megan presented. We still have that deck available. AHA members can access the recording and the like. And I tasted the earlier iteration of this beer, so I immediately said, we want to lead homebrewers to those next frontiers as the national membership group, and so NA is absolutely on my mind. To me, there's a big difference between quality and food safety, so I want to learn how to properly brew a non-alcoholic beer that wouldn't normally have that alcohol as a stabilizing and protective agent against pathogens and the like. So I'm here to learn, flew in from Colorado, in Asheville, and looking at an amazing team, and Josh is going to take us through some brewing. And here you go, Crispy.
And I guess I'm the token homebrewer here. Crispy Fry, retired 5 years ago to Western North Carolina. I've been brewing for 30 years, about 500 batches, lifetime member of the AHA, was on the governing committee and the board of directors with the Brewers Association for many years. So I have a strong affinity to the group. And, when I retired, what happened was, I didn't drink Monday through Friday night. And suddenly every day is a Friday night when you're retired. And I found myself drinking 2-3 beers a night and fighting it on my hikes in the mountains because my waist. And around 2-3 years ago, I started to become aware of these non-alcoholic beers. The first one being Athletic. I don't mean to put a plug, but their Run Wild IPA was a epiphany to me. I could still enjoy the flavor. I still drink 2 or 3 beers a day, but I like sliding one of those non-alcoholic beers in for number 2. And at the end of the night, I've had 2 instead of 3. Well, that's a challenge for a home brewer, and that's why I'm here today to keep Josh honest, so we have enough information to learn how to do it at home. Cheers.
All right, now I have one question. So of our group here, I've homebrewed not nearly as many batches as you, but I've homebrewed or brewed plenty. So Josh, without you speaking up, who has actually brewed a 0.5 NA beer before? Okay. All right. So there's only 2 people in the room, and it would be interesting to know, and I hope you put it in the comments, whether you have brewed a 0.5 NA beer. But that's what we're going to do, and everybody's going to learn that today. So Josh, please take us through the process.
Let's get brewing, please.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we've had a lot of time to get us to this point for sure. So,
Move this stuff out.
all right, who's gonna help me mill in?
Great. I think Julia, you're helping out with that today. I'm going to grab
All
some
right,
pictures
you know how
while
to
you
work
guys
a
are doing
drill,
that.
right?
Yes, I do.
All right.
All right.
Well, if you're not going to be doing a play-by-play, you can just put the mic here.
Can I test it?
Yeah, you can go and I'll dump.
Okay, now?
Yeah. That's it. Yeah, so normally you've got, that 8 to 10 to 11 pounds of grain for a 5 or 6 gallon batch. This literally has like 5 pounds. So half the amount to get us to that like 10, 17 stage.
So it's cheaper.
Well, there is that too. It is cheaper.
Yeah, but hold it.
Yeah. I would also say I always taste my grains,
Yeah.
right? And I always make sure you don't put your fingers into the grain mill. That's my 2 pro tips.
Yep. Keep dust down. All right. My hot water is where I need it to be. I don't need that in there.
Yeah, I think arguably from the get-go, we're seeing that this can be looked at as more sustainable, right? You're using less, it takes less time to make it, you're knocking out fast, you're boiling faster. So overall, I think when you look at like even energy savings overall and what you're doing and able to create, because ultimately we don't need as much energy because we're still making a beer that we're getting less alcohol out of. So just
Yeah.
really interesting to
Yeah,
note that.
Same amount of time, less ingredient. I mean, hops are always expensive, especially, and I didn't mention, I try to use the Lupo Max where it has less plant matter in it and
Yes.
stuff. So those can tend to be a little bit higher, but I think all in all, there's like 6 ounces of hops in total, and that's like boil, whirlpool, and dry hop.
What
So-
gallon batch again?
6.
6.
6 gallon batch. Yep.
Yep, 6 to try to get 5 gallons in cans. So, all right, mashing in. Somebody give me the time. I'll get it anyways. So let's just call that like 11:35 by the time we're in.
Josh, while you're doing that, I know you do a later acidification, but what's your starting water? Just from the tap, any salt?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's all.
Repeat the question because you didn't have a mic.
Yeah. So, any water treatments or anything. I mean, in Asheville, we've got super awesome water. All it is carbon filtered. I don't really do anything with my water. I generally don't have to do anything. By the time this beer is like done, and it's about pH is about 5, but then using lactic acid and get it down to that like 3, 8, and 4, and it only takes about a half an ounce for lactic acid to bring it down. So, but yeah, I mean, super fast, simple mashing. Started at 175. We just ended at about 173, and then we'll just keep it there for the 30 minutes, maybe about 20 minutes in. I'll start a Orloff, get some clarity, and then sparge and go to boil.
So stir it, Josh. Well,
Yeah.
So as a
getting
home
closer,
brewer,
crispy.
your temperature blows me away, because I learned 30 years ago 168, 170 was the knockout. That's what you want to do to denature the enzymes, to stop the process. And so you're starting even higher temperature than that. But it makes sense because you want to get those complex non-fermentable sugars.
Yep. Yeah. Weirdly enough, it's still, I still use 170 sparge water, but really you mash in higher than that anyways. But just I think from a consistency, professional brewing standpoint, I still, sparge at 170 degrees with sparge water, even though your mash is now 172 degrees. Just kind of weird, but it worked out the last time we did this, and Megan can attest to the final product. She's had more NA batches than I have on my tongue, so she's the sensory more than I am, and so when we had the finished product, I sent cans to Megan and Mark that were there for that day, and we got on a Zoom and we did sensory, and they were like, "Wow, this turned out really, really good." And it was my first one, and there's just not a lot of data out there to figure it out, So it was kind of like 20 years of pro brewing experience to lean on, and recipe formulation, and then just the bits and pieces that I could find out there, to kind of put a recipe together, and temps and things like that. So
I have a question, maybe to Megan. What he's doing here makes a lot of sense to get this sort of flavors, these specialty grains. But Doug had done a interview with a gentleman from Partake, and he did it slightly differently. He did more of a party guile. He took the first runnings, let's say he had a 1060 beer, and literally diluted it 4 or 5 times. What are the pluses, minuses, or thoughts on that? I mean, that's another biological way.
Yeah, I think again, the methodology to it is what makes it kind of beautiful. As a brewer, I think you can look at different ways. Obviously, at scale, it begins to make more sense to say, how do I make something really consistent? That's your goal. And I think when you're home brewing at a craft level, you're kind of attacking it from a different way. We're making a low volume to begin with here, so the point here is restricting that alcohol formation and also making it safe. Right? So before I would even get into the different methods, I think noting right away that pH is really important. That was probably the first thing I began to educate people on. When we created this program, I was talking to Dr. Keith Villa, who we all know and love from Blue Moon and Saria, right? Who took this technology to a pro level scale. And the first thing we talked about was the knowledge needs to be out there about the food safety aspect of this. So managing pH is important. And I think Josh and I stress that we were putting that to the test at a homebrew level. Can we make a homebrew beer survive the trip to San Diego from Asheville, North Carolina, and be safe and taste good so that we could share it with people a few months after we brewed it?
And I want to pursue that while we're having mashing. I mean, safe is not guaranteed, and I think it's good for everyone to realize, like, and I'm going to brew NA beer. I'm psyched to do it, but safer, right? Because how can you guarantee safety when you have a food grade product, and foodborne pathogens can grow in food, right? And so what is, there's techniques on how to do this. That's what Crispy was asking about. And then there's ways to have your beer remain stable and ensure that you are not having it go past its shelf life, where it's not just stalling on flavor, but then it's potentially, going to a place that's beyond the quality that you intended.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So especially for homebrewing, it's a perfect audience to start with, because as a home brewer, former home brewer, in my days of brewing regular alcoholic beer frequently, it's about starting with cleanliness, right? And Josh will talk about that. I mean, you have to have the cleanliness needs to be there. And really, I think David Quain did some really interesting research on where that pH begins to be the threshold where more pathogens are likely to grow. So for us, I think targeting that 4 pH and even slightly below, not only helped prevent that and give us more longevity of our product, but there's other tips along the way. We want to keep it cold. We want everything that comes into contact to it to be clean. And we want to watch our pH and just make sure we're monitoring that. Now, we'll talk and answer some questions later about how to know if your NA beer didn't turn out well. Did it get infected? And I think these are all the similar things you would expect when you're brewing an alcoholic beer. But even more so, just to keep that in mind, like if you clean well, clean better. And that's something you just have to keep in mind. You're not going to have that natural protecting agent of ethanol, which means we're just setting ourselves up in any other situation for those pathogens to be able to form. And we want to watch out for that. But to go back to your question about dilution being a method. So, kind of thinking about, we're talking about biological methods of production today. Now, for other people interested in the category, there are mechanical methods of dealcoholization and production. So in this case, dilution is we used to call dilution being a solution when I was making beers at CalSec with global brewers and trying to teach them ways of utilizing advanced products to sort of balance some of these things that maybe disadvantages, if you will, to flavor profile of brewing when you're making beers with lower amounts of alcohol, because ethanol is such a powerful and flavorful ingredient, as you know. And when we're trying to restrict its formation and finish at below 0.5% and using dilution, well, one of the things you end up with is a beer that tastes quite diluted and watery. So there are, at a pro level and at a homebrew level, probably less available, but there are ways to overcome that, particularly from hops. And Josh and I learned that last time. Our first brew, I made a mistake. I added all of our hops at the same time, so we missed out on our Whirlpool hops, and we had a kind of lackluster beer. But we're so fortunate as homebrewers today to have access to some of these advanced brewing technologies, and hops have really. We've really seen, we live in an advent now where we can use hops to basically fix our mistakes. Advanced hop products on either the bittering side, from alpha and beta acids, to different types of hop oils that add complexity, mouthfeel, and there's just a great range of products out there. And we did a lot with a little last time. I mean, Josh really was able to we used ethanol to our advantage because we had a restricted amount in our beer, so we were able to use an ethanol base and blend a hop oil in there and really lift the aromatic quality of this beer and ultimately the mouthfeel.
And can you use hops as a preservative aspect too?
Absolutely you can, and that's one of the reasons why I think brewing an NA IPA is a really great way to start. I think having that higher level of alpha acid protection in there is just another way to sort of guarantee that you're going to create a product that is stable and able to last. So IPAs are a really great way to start as you begin to brew your homebrews, NA homebrews at home.
So the other question that I've got, so Michael Tonsmeyer was on the program recently, and he was walking us through, I guess you'd call them table beers. Now, this is another term. Is there a number for table beers that should be in the range of?
Yeah, so low alcohol really means anything kind of under that. So we think about the way we look at beer here. There is a designation for low alcohol, which I believe is somewhere below 2.5% ABV, if I remember correctly. I don't address that in my learnings. We actually we address low alcoholic beverages in more traditional beer training programs like Cicerone, for example. But for us, we're really focused on everything under 0.5 or less. But looking at the history, which is very interesting, we end up designating non-alcoholic as 0.5 as a result of prohibition and the laws changing. But when we think about table beer, that really goes back to the history of like brewing at home, which is a great topic for today. And these beers being brewed with maybe the second runnings of a traditional beer, and a table beer being exactly that, something that you can sustain around the table and share with your entire family, that would have had a lower ABV to it. And maybe that, they weren't probably as obsessed back then with the amount, but the idea was when I can't drink water because water it maybe not be reliable or safe, these types of products available in the home of table beer made it something that a child could drink, or maybe an older person, or for somebody whose only source of clean drinking water came from regular beer. This would be a method of being able to sustain yourself throughout the day without becoming overly intoxicated. And people were quite aware of that. The monasteries were aware of that. That maybe drunkenness wasn't something that they were trying to achieve. They were trying to achieve a balanced state. And this was this is a way of receiving nutrition, especially if you were fasting. So these table beers became an option for people. And I think that's really what we see today. I mean, this is, again, an opportunity to say we can drink more beer by having these offerings that are lower in alcohol, that you can either weave into your normal consumption patterns, or if you feel like it for today, you don't really need the byproduct of ethanol. It's not necessary. We can brew beers, restrict the fermentation, or brew them and remove the alcohol and still gain all those health benefits.
So how we doing, first of all, Josh, on the mash?
Yeah, we're about 15 minutes in, but I'll have to start babysitting it here in a little bit and taking care of my tank. I've got sanitizer in here, so I need to pump it into a bucket so I can sanitize some
I want to
parts.
jump in on how are we telling the temperature of the mash tun? Is there a temperature gauge?
Yeah, it's welded into the tank, and then it tells me right here.
Oh, okay, control reader.
Yep.
And what is it?
Looks like 172 Fahrenheit.
Yeah, 172 to 173 back and forth, and that's what I want.
So this next question you can weigh in on, I think, and Megan, you also, with your experience. So Michael Tonsmeyer was on the program, and he was talking about low alcohol beers, and many of the things you've already mentioned, that the lack of ethanol has its own set of complications, and the increase in starches has its own set of complications. And the Party-Gyle method was discussed, and Michael, I think, initially used that, but just did not like it. And he felt like to get a flavorful, low alcohol beer, and I don't know what number I'm afraid to throw out there. I'm sure it wasn't NA, but to get a lower alcohol beer, he thought the first runnings and diluting it and doing whatever else you needed to do, because he felt like you need the best ingredients, the first things that come out. It was just all about the best, the first, the most, and then just bring it down with the right water. Who can address that one for us? It's an opinion.
I mean, I'll put my 2 cents in on that, because we talked about, like, the question was asked for dilution earlier, and I always go back to this, like, do you want, like, the frozen concentrated orange juice and then add water to have OJ, or do you want to, like, have a bunch of squeezed oranges in your glass and drink that? So I think even as, like, a home brewer, I never really wanted to dilute.
I don't like that analogy. That's not fair. No. I mean, I think there is plenty of wine that is brewed from a concentrate.
And you like it?
Well, I don't know that I know when I have it and when I don't, is my point.
Yeah.
And I think frozen orange juice compared to fresh orange juice, that's never a good comparison. I'm sorry. There's too much stuff that goes on to get it frozen.
Yeah.
That ruins the flavor. So is there better analogy out there? And maybe you know it, Megan, if Josh doesn't know it, and I don't know it. All I know is Michael Tonsmeyer is pretty good too, and his thought is first runnings and dilute it with water. Is there another analogy?
Yeah, I mean, I don't hate your analogy at all, actually. And if you think about, we'll take the wine comparison. I mean, when you look at how non-alcoholic wine is made, for example, the best non-alcoholic wine or the most expensive on the shelf, which is reflective of where the winemaker thinks it should be priced at, is made from very, very high quality, expensive grapes grown in the best growing regions. But what happens is you lose 30% of your volume when you have to spin out the alcohol. And so when you think about it that way, the winemakers will tell you when you're dealing with simplified ingredients that it really does come down to the quality and the nature of your input material. So I wouldn't disagree with thinking that the party guile method is giving you something different because you are washing off or rinsing off a different dilution than you are in your first running. So I would have to say I kind of agree with the fact that maybe starting with something, especially if you think, we'll get into it, but when you think about the flavors that people often complain about in non-alcoholic beer, the first one is they say it's too wordy. It just tastes like wort, right? That's methionol. Yep. So methionol, you can look at this. This was something that Keith Villa brought to my attention. We looked at it really hard in our material, and I talked to Dr. Bill Simpson at Cara Technologies and Aroxa with this. This is a compound that we train on. It's in all malt. It's malt derived. Every single beer out there would have methionol in it, but it's not odor active in ethanol. So when you take methionol and you dump it into a glass of regular beer, it disappears. But when you smell it in an NA beer, it smells like potato chips, potato soup, like boxed mashed potatoes to me. And it's not appealing. And so I'd have to imagine that to some degree you're getting a richer starting input material if you were to use and again, this is why we often we don't repitch our yeast often when we're making NA beer, right? We're not saving a lot of those things because we're not always pulling off the greatest. We're not able to hide or disguise or even bring out the more subtle flavors because we don't have ethanol as a solvent. So you have these more concentrated flavors of things like methionol that you have to overcome or address. And I would definitely say that that's something you have to keep in mind as a brewer when you go for it. I don't think there's any right way, but that's interesting.
I'm going to jump in on this topic, and it is philosophy, right? And there's also small beer, right? You rinse your beer once and you make a barley wine. Second beer might be an English mild that you've only rinsed once, but you're not really diluting it down in the method that you're talking about that Michael's referring to. So there's near beer, there's small beer, as opposed to the NA level of things, and that's more the table beer concept. So there's all sorts of ways to approach this. It's not all or nothing. It's if you don't want the alcohol, you should be learning how to brew NA. But if you want low to no or lesser alcohol, look at brewing those styles and or techniques that bring you to that low level below 4%, like 3% and less.
So I was going to dive into that, but let's stay on topic. Why is this different? I mean, we're not doing party guile, and we're probably not doing what Michael Tonsmeyer suggested. So what are we doing? How would you describe that process, and why do you think it's best for the home brewer?
Explainable in terms of high temp mash to create complex sugars and to have a yeast that is a low attenuation yeast that barely eats any sugar. And you just created a bunch of complex sugars that it can't eat. So between those two, it just gives you that 0.5 or below of a finished product. There's just not that much fermentation in it. And again, there's not that much malt in it. We started at 1017, which is really low. So we'll just take for instance, if you could brew a 1017 beer and then add an American ale yeast, and then it would finish at, probably 1.005, and all of a sudden you've got yourself a table beer. I think it's having that high temp mash and that different strain of yeast is what then combines you into that.
What's the class of yeast? Is it maltose negative yeast? I've heard that term. What are we calling these yeasts?
That's what White Labs calls the strain that we're using.
Yep.
Okay.
Maltose negative.
Name that strain.
Oh, yeah.
Where's my notes? I don't have it memorized.
And we're using a White Labs maltose negative yeast.
Yeah, so WLP 618, all day NA. And it is a vaulted series for them. So they don't have it all year round.
So does anybody else offer something you think is similar?
Yeah, I think Leylamond has a dried yeast. But and I haven't done this yet, but I have read that doing a high mash temp and using a regular beer yeast. So you created a bunch of complex sugars that you can use a regular beer yeast, and there's so much complex sugars there that it'll also barely eat that if you use a normal beer yeast. So there are these strains that are already out there that are for NA, but I have read that people are also doing that high temp mash and then using regular beer yeast, and it just doesn't ferment much of it.
Before we leave yeast, homebrewers like dried yeast just because it's a lot simpler. I love white labs, I love the wet yeast, but from a practical point of view, dry yeasts are very convenient. Have you heard of one that is in that same category?
Yeah, I think Leyland has like an NA yeast. I haven't used it.
Yeah.
It's dry.
Yes,
And it's dry,
I
yes,
believe it is.
yes.
Yeah, I talked to the Lallemand team when I wrote my material, and they were telling us about that as well. So yeah, I would just say what's different here is we're using a biological method with
need a
with
sparge.
6 gallon starting material, and yeah, we're using yeah.
The brewer's interrupting us, and that
Yep.
takes priority.
Let's do it. We got a schedule here.
So what you're doing, Josh, if you can.
Yeah, so this is just like a stainless steel basket inside, and it's just this is just the mash tun. So it's kind of
Brew in one system.
yeah, it's brewing one. So the heating element is basically in the kettle, and then this is just another stainless steel kettle sleeve in it that just has a perforation on the bottom and has holes, lets the wort go through.
And the less malt in here, the easier it is to lift up to let it drain.
No
That's a good
stuck
trick.
mash with NA beer, no, because there's just so little malt in it. So, but yeah, I gotta go get my sparge water and
And this
stay
is
on
an
track.
amazing system because you do what you got to do.
Yeah.
I'm just commenting so you can do so. This system allows you to have your mash tun turn into your boil kettle. And then there's many different manufacturers here that are doing this. This brew in one system that, by the way, is electric. We're not connected to propane, even though yes, we're venting because it's a beautiful day here in Asheville. What a game changer, right? This is a game changer for indoor style brewing. You end up most of the time in the garage though, because a lot of these systems are 220 volt as opposed to 110. But I brew stovetop from kits and extract and steeping grains, or do all grain brew in a bag on my stovetop, watch football game. I brew in my patio, gravity fed system with propane, and use my patio table to have my mash tun above my boil kettle. And I do now garage brewing because of these brew in one electric systems, and they're amazing.
Brewing. So Josh, tell us what's going on.
Oh, I'm just using some sparge water to rinse my grains, and then obviously boost my volume up in my kettle. That was one. I'll be back for another.
Go wrong.
Gotcha.
All right, gonna interrupt Brewer Brewing.
My rudimentary way of maxing out my system. How do we have that?
Oh, that's genius.
Yeah. But there's been a lot of adapting today. That's okay. Watch out behind you, Chris.
I just put your glass under the drip.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
So let's keep on to questions, but I would like to finish the carbonation because I think that's one of the most important things we can talk about.
Yeah, well,
So-
I would like to get Josh's input on that too. I think he can speak to that too as well.
Well, but I'm also real anxious from a home brewing point of view. I'm fortunate enough that I have the equipment to force carb, but the beginning home brewer doesn't. And so I guess what I'm looking for is the recommendation for a beginning home brewer on how to serve his NA beer.
Or her beer.
His or her, excuse me, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're either gonna end up with a beer that is probably not gonna have your desired amount of carbonation, unless you're gonna go ahead and bottle, really try to take that experiment of adding a little bit of a sugar in there and hoping you get some interaction. But I think this is a real challenge for homebrewers. This is not in my area of expertise because I haven't brewed enough NA batches and bottled them. But I'd be curious on Josh's remarks for that because I think this is something a homebrewer does have to overcome. And if not, it would be an upgrade required to your equipment to make that a consistent product that would have those target levels of CO2.
What's the question?
About carbonating if you aren't able to force carb. bottle condition?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can still bottle condition, right? I do not. I took my mic off. So.
You missed the part that we determined you probably can't bottle condition.
Well, we had a little sidebar. Doug wasn't paying attention. And my hypothesis is that, for years there was a discussion between DME and table sugar. And table sugar being the simplest sugar, any yeast should be able to munch on that sugar. And the old rule of thumb was a cup and a quarter of dry malt extract to 5 gallons to bottle to get 2.4 volumes, or 3/4 cups of sugar.
Right.
3/4 cups of simple table sugar in a 5-gallon batch. I'd have to go to pro mash, but we're talking in the tenths of alcohol pretension.
So it just won't be alcohol free. It could be an NA still.
Exactly.
Maybe.
And I'd have to do the math, but I'm thinking the safest thing for a home brewer to try would simply be table sugar versus a DME even, because it's going to have more complex sugar.
like it.
So that's what I'm going to try when I brew my first one.
Or beginning brewers, how Doug asked the question, beginning brewers can buy keg setups, right? Like, it's a little bit more investment. Megan said it's kind of an add-on, but you can be a beginning brewer and do this because you're kegging.
Yeah.
So that's important.
And I think Josh would be interesting to see what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah. So, but what is our conclusion then for a beginner home brewer, as best we know right now? What would you recommend? And Crispy, I'm looking at you because you know the gadgets, and I think you just said it. And Josh, you jump in on this. But what do we think the simplest thing for a beginner home brewer to carbonate his NA beer? And you need to get a little further in.
Yeah, I think the issue is like not having that residual sugar left over because we created a bunch of complex sugars that we wouldn't be able to carbonate in the bottle. That's my thought on that.
But using the simple table sugars in a bottling bucket at the end, would that yeast potentially have, they're all the simple sugars. It's not the complex sugars that you're trying to keep in there. Again, it's a hypothesis. That's all I have here because I've not tried it, but
Right.
I'm thinking, the beginning brewer, yes, it's a keg and some CO2 is an investment.
Or canning and forced carbonation.
Yep. Now, Josh here has a wonderful system with a spunding valve, and he has it all self-carbonating, but not everybody can start with a spike system. That's so lovely. I'm going to try it. That's the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a 5-gallon batch, and I'm going to use simple table sugars. I'm going to talk to Jim tonight about getting the appropriate yeast, or go to Lallemand and find theirs, and give it a go. If it's completely flat, and I would do everything that a home brewer would do. After I bottle it, I'd probably box it, put it on top of my fridge where it's maybe 75, 78 because of the motor's heat for about a week, and then I bring it down and I start popping them open. I'll let you guys know.
And you're going to test to see if you get carbonation. You're also going to want to test that to see what the ABV is. And that's more advanced.
Yeah, that I think I'm just simply going to put into Pro Mash. Like, here's my recipe and here's where I end, and then I'll put a cup of sugar or 3/4 cup of sugar and see what it says. Assuming I get full carbonation, fermentation, that'll tell me, because I don't know how to measure final, once it's fully carbonated, my hydrometer, I guess there's a formula out there that you can use, but they're not accurate when you have alcohol.
Yeah, I think you're still going to have the issue of having a low attenuate of yeast. Even so, you just add in table sugar, but then you still have this yeast that still is not going to eat very much. So I think you're still going to have the issue of having flat beer and not being
It's
able to
possible.
carbonate.
It's possible.
I mean,
And what about the thought of using what is it? I'm going to say it wrong. CBC, I think, is the Cascale yeast that you use just for bottling for when you've had a beer or mead that's sat around forever. It's supposed to have no flavor. It's a Lallemand product, CBC, something like that. It's a bottle condition only yeast. So maybe I could do a split batch and try that as well. My only concern, again, is that it may start fermenting more than I want.
Right, and then you go above the threshold.
Right.
But I mean, that's.
No, it's a home
what-
brewer. I'm
that's what
looking to have a
homebrewing's all
tasty
about.
1 or 2% beer. So it's like I said. So there's a couple of thoughts there, but need people to try it.
Yeah, I mean, I think if anybody's got anything to chime in too, that they've got some ideas, out there. But I mean, being a home brewer is all about experimenting and figuring it out on a 5-gallon batch instead of a 1,000-gallon batch. So,
Agreed.
yeah.
All right, so you've got temps coming up.
Yeah, now we wait the long wait of trying to get to 212 with a electric heating element.
Is this a 220 or?
Yeah, it's just a regular wall outlet, so it does take.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
we're at 170, so we're probably looking at, I would say, about an hour to get to 212 at this point.
How are your shadow puppets?
They're good. I saw you doing them earlier, so
just
maybe
teasing.
I'll learn after you.
So again, on the pH, the lactic acid, the ½ ounce, you're going to add that after you've chilled it?
No, I'm
in
gonna
the
add it.
boil.
Yeah, so as soon as I turn the heating element off, and I basically just whirlpool with my paddle, and then I'll add a ½ ounce.
And a ½ ounce to a 5 gallon, maybe a 6 gallon boil before you lose some volume?
Yeah. I mean, I probably have like 7 gallons, so I'll lose, I lose about, maybe 3/4 of a gallon or a gallon at the bottom before my dip tube. And
So for the home brewers, I'd like to ask you to do a pH reading before you add it and a pH reading after you add
I
it.
would absolutely do that, and I would go from a small increment. So when I did it the first time, I thought I was going with a small increment, so I went with a ½ an ounce, and it absolutely dove a whole point, and I just didn't think it was going to do that much. So I think it's a matter of, I mean, you can, right, you just whirlpool it in and be like, okay, that's not enough, but it moved XYZ amount of points.
Yeah.
So if I
But it was like the discussion that we had with soda. Okay, well, people have been making root beer at home for how long?
Yeah.
And none of that's pasteurized, and they have it on draft at their kegger. This is the exact same thing. It even has like a little bit of alcohol in it, and the pH is low. So it's like, how do you tread those waters as like a home brewer to like not turn them off, that this is okay, and to be clean and sanitary, low pH, keep it cold, and drink it in 2 months. Like, to me,
That's like the baseline.
that's
And
like all I can say.
And I think Athletic does a really good job.
Yeah, and I'm at about 9 now. We'll have some boil off, and like I said, I lose about 3/4 to maybe a gallon. So I've looked, like, this has measurements on it too. I've looked in there a couple of times, and it's at like low 6s, and again, like transfers and canning, and so yeah, I start high to at least get like that 5 gallon of finished product.
So, Josh, this has been fun. We're about an hour and 15 minutes into brewing.
Mm-hmm.
At what stage are we, and kind of what will happen next over the few minutes, and what are we waiting on, I guess?
Yeah, so we've mashed in, we've made our wort, we have our kettle volume, which is about 9 gallons, which will eventually turn into like a 5.5 or 6 gallon batch. But we are just waiting on to get to a boil at our measured hops, only boil for 30 minutes. And then cool it down and add it to the fermenter. There is something behind it of the 30-minute mash, and then
30-minute boil?
yeah, and then a 30-minute boil.
I know this is going to get cut out, so don't worry about the mic. The traditional 60-minute is to get that bitterness. 30-minute typically was the beginning of flavor, where you'd get some bitterness, but you'd get more of the flavor.
Yeah.
And then the last 5 to 15 was aroma with some flavor. So you're really, you can get bitterness. We'd learned from hazy IPA with no boil,
Right.
basically
Yep.
a couple of minutes, and
Yep.
I should say not a no boil, but not adding the hops till the last minute or two, not at all. That's just what it is. That's all.
All right, so we're an hour and 15 minutes since we started, and we're waiting on this to come up to a boil. Mm-hmm. This may sound that nitpicking, but if we're approaching a boil, do you have any idea why it's magic that it hits a boil and then you wait 30 minutes? Or if it, slowly approaching, 190, 195, why does that not count? I mean, especially if you're in a hurry.
Well, boiling hops, the only way you can get the bitterness out of the hops is via a boil. So anything before
212,
Yep. It has to
depending on
boil-
altitude.
Yep, it has to boil to break the oil out of
Isomerize.
the hop and turn it into bitterness
Okay.
and whatever. So like anything before that or after that would be from an aroma standpoint, you know.
So it's not purely a sterilization.
There is, yeah, I mean, you have
Yeah.
that in there, but you
Yeah.
and you also have the concentration of wort because you've boiled it
Right.
down, which drives gravity up. So you
Right.
might gain a few points with that. But yes, there is some sterilization in there.
Okay.
And then some hop bitterness is what you calculate on. That's why I said that in the beginning of like when you're doing this to make sure when you put your hop additions in to change them to 30 because the default's always 60.
All right, so what happens at boil? Can you step us through the process? Let's say it hit boil right now. What would happen
Yep.
next?
So we'll add our 30-minute bittering hops. And then really that's the only hop addition that we have through the boil, and then turn the heat off, and then we just have a large whirlpool hop dose. And then after our small amount of fermentation, then we'll dry hop,
Okay.
which is at the end of fermentation in this one tank, and then from there I transfer it, let it all settle out, get somewhat clear, cold, carbonate, and then can off of the second tank.
So I know mistakes happen. We all have them. And I think you guys, for HomebrewCon, actually had a oops when you brewed your NA beers, at least what I heard. Can you explain that and also explain why it didn't just ruin the batch? I mean, because people are going to be panicky. This is an NA beer. I don't know how to do this. And if I did it wrong, is it dangerous?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah, I think there's like trying to get that bitterness level correct, because again, you've got like slightly sweet wort that hasn't really fermented out. So now you're trying to balance out that dry acidity with some of the lactic acid that we've also talked about that is, keeps down on spoilage, but it also creates like a somewhat like drying effect of that. And then having the bitterness level higher than you normally would for such a low gravity beer, because you're trying to drive away that sweetness or that wordy character with hops, and then also driving that flavor component away with dry hopping.
So what happened in the case of the batch that was taken to HomebrewCon, and why was it okay, and how are you going to do it different this time?
Yeah, so what I realized before is we were supposed to have like a 30-minute edition and a 15, and the 15 and the 30 got put together, which then equated to this like 40 IBU. But I realized that the bitterness in the IBU level wasn't bad at all to have it that high for how sweet of a wort that we actually do have. So there was the change in that. So I just put that 15 and that 30 together now on this batch. And then on the other batch was,
So you're going to do it the same way?
no, now those 15 and 30 together. So there's only a 30-minute addition
Okay.
with that higher IBU with that.
Okay.
So there's no 15, there's just 30
Yep.
and then 0. And then the other thing was, we all know that if we add something in, we can't like just take it out. So, from not having, a plethora of, NA beers, on my belt, was I'll just go like low on the dry hopping. And if for some reason it's lackluster and I need to do something with hop oil, I can. So I went really low on the dry hopping. It was probably like, I think I had about an ounce of dry hopping for, that 5 or 6 gallons. And it was just, when I tasted at the end of fermentation, the cooling was on, it was just, again, really lackluster. There wasn't a large amount of like that, we're looking, the stone fruit and the peachy and whatever from
Yep.
Citra and the other 2 hops. It just wasn't there. So
So I'm going to put you on the spot. You had some. How was it?
We had some at the Malt Club, I think it was
Yeah, I
4
brought-
months ago. And I was kind of the same way I felt when I had my first professional athletic. It was balanced. I liked it. I thought the aroma came through very nicely. There was certainly that sort of, I don't want to say dank, but that citrus bowl aroma, stone fruit. And, the body was still a little light. IPAs can dry out, and so it wasn't, out of the realm of the style. But I would have liked just a teeny bit more body.
yeah, no, I agree with that. And that can be, tweaked on.
This
Well-
is a full celebration.
That is a perfect segue then. But to wrap that up, So mistakes happen in brewing, and you were able to adjust it in the final with how you were planning to do dry hopping and the hop oils.
Yep.
Now, just one last question there, and then I want to go to body, because I think that's a really important question that you talked about. When you look into dry hopping, it was my understanding that hops primarily react to the ethanol or alcohol that's in the finished beer.
Megan's shaking her head yes.
Oh, okay. So good. Come over here, Megan. So when you dry hop a NA beer, are you accomplishing anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're still, it's like making it's like making a tea, right? I mean, I think you're still, putting those hop pellets in, and you're still getting that flavor and aroma out of it, even though the ethanol is not there.
Yeah, I mean, there was a great talk on this. There's been some really great talks on this at the Craft Brewers Conference this year. CalSec, who actually helped as authors on our syllabus, did a lot of work on this. They're in advanced hop extract. So you're right. I mean, ultimately, you have less ethanol. Ethanol's a solvent, so it's pulling out all of the primary compounds, our hydrocarbons, and we're thinking about the terpene profile. But some of those more subtle things are not going to be present. So water's also a solvent, so we are getting some solubilization of those major compounds. But ultimately, what we ended up doing is what I think in adding a hop oil created a really balanced and interesting NA beer, because we were using the most effective method. We were directly solubilizing those more complex hop aromas that we wanted to achieve. It's harder to do that, if not impossible, when dry hopping an NA beer. So it isn't very effective. I wouldn't recommend a home brewer overly dry hop an NA beer. I think you're going to end up pulling a lot of characteristics that are probably not as pleasant or favorable, and even really accelerating certain oxidation compounds from hops, like beta damascenon is one I think about, that's going to have that drying kind of black tea character. Yeah, exactly. But those things that just degrade in your beer over time, because they will be present in there. So I think just light dry hopping is fine. If you want more intense hop aroma, you do have to look to some of these more unique innovations, which was why I think NA beers have become more popular now, because we have these technologies and we're finding they're making their ways into commercial examples, which are giving us a more diverse beer stream.
Beta Damascus. How did you say that?
Beta damascenon,
Damascenon.
which tastes a lot.
I think I got it.
Yeah, you got
Sounds
it.
like a dinosaur.
It does.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
What the heck is that?
Yeah, well, this is again, I'll credit my friends at Cara Technologies Limited in the United Kingdom. This is Dr. Bill Simpson's company, so look into it. This is where, if you've trained for Cicerone or BJCP on the Aroxa compounds, those were created by Dr. Simpson's team. And beta damascenon is a compound that we train on because it's in about 85% of IPAs that you would try commercially. And basically what it is, it's a compound that just as green matter begins to disintegrate, really, if you think about green matter in hops turning brown over time, that is happening inside your liquid at a small level. And then these are the compounds that, influence the character of a beer when we're tasting and evaluating it. And it often tastes, it's kind of drying, a little bit like tea on the palate, and just something that we find present in there. And also it can happen that way.
So that is a perfect segue. That was actually my question. I didn't know what beta Damascus.
It's just south of Israel.
Damascus. Yes. Thank you. Denny Kahn and I were talking, and he was talking about how much he's learned about dry hopping. And one of the things that he was talking about, and he loved the hop oils, but he was talking about phantasm, I think it is. And he was saying basically the same thing, except he couldn't say beta damascus either. And I'm sure I still haven't said it right. I think the only time I said it right, I wasn't on mic.
He's still on coffee, folks, not a drop of beer.
But Denny he said it was crucial to have some plant matter in if you're using those hop oils. So that's what you're talking about. It's exactly what Denny said. Is that correct?
Well, that's interesting. That product I understand isn't that the one that's created from grapes? Yeah, to give you some more of that thiol character.
Right.
And that would be the reason why. You're not solubilizing those thiols when you lack that when your ethanol levels are very low. Again, rendering dry hopping very inefficient in non-alcoholic beer.
Yeah.
So I just recommend, I actually liked the way that we did it. I wish that hop oils, these advanced products, were more available to home brewers. So I hope that that's something we see. There's no reason it shouldn't be. I think it's a really great way to stabilize hops. You know, it's really one of the cleanest ways to get it into a beer. It's very sustainable. You lose less. You can control that characteristic more. And I think that's one of the things that makes Phantasm very interesting is those thiol compounds are part of what make hops so complex and so appealing to people, and something at a very, very low threshold we're able to pick up on. So I definitely would agree that, products like that being available at the homebrew level now, even though it wasn't as easy for Josh. I mean, he literally had to create his own emulsion. That's a challenge, right? When you look at our original recipe and when I recommended he get hop oil, he had to manually drop, we had to use ethanol to our advantage then and remain under 0.5, but use a vodka base to add this hop oil into to get that emulsion to stay in our beer. But it brightened up the beer. I think everybody that tasted it really agreed that the hop aroma was really, really good. And that was because of that adjustment that we made, which is nice, but another challenge at the homebrew level for sure.
So we were just talking about whether dry hopping in an NA beer, whether the alcohol was significant enough to actually solubilize the oils that are in the dry hops. And I think the answer was kinda. Or there are other products that provide balance and interest to the beer. Now, we got off on Phantasm, my issue, but it raises a good question. Does it have the same problem, do you think, and I realize you may not have even thought of this question, but if you put Phantasm in an NA beer, do you have the same problem? Is it gonna draw out those thiols?
Yeah, that's a question. I've not used that product commercially. I'm just familiar with it because I believe it was created in New Zealand, and I worked, as you can tell, for a New Zealand hop company. So I was just made aware of it then, but I haven't experimented with it much. And this is what I think is exciting. I'm so excited at the end of this to see what homebrewers come back with. And they're the ones that have originally challenged these boundaries. I have no doubt that non-alcoholic brewing can be transformed from the kitchen of a homebrewer because it will think of more innovative ways that scale to local craft breweries that, quite frankly, due to the moderation movement we were talking about, are going to have these challenges. Yes.
That was very profound.
Yes.
That homebrewers will what?
Homebrewers will transform the landscape of non-alcoholic beer in their kitchen because they have to think about these types of challenges and overcome them because you still want something that's drinkable and delicious. And they like a challenge. Think about it. I think about every homebrewer I ever made loved the challenge of making their next batch better. And what better way to do that when you're restricting ethanol? And you're thinking about safety, and you're thinking about how can I maximize my flavor in this liquid bread I'm making at under 0.5% of alcohol. That's what a great challenge, right? And then also seeking out interesting and novel ingredients to use at homebrew. I remember trying to get Nelson Sauvin for one of my homebrews I did at Boston Beer, and I called the beer Seeking Nelson because I had to call 14 homebrew shops to find enough Nelson Sauvin to make a beer. And I think that type of questioning from the homebrew level of why can't I get a hop oil in my local shop will challenge the industry to begin to make these things more readily available. And now we have ways to make more hop waters at home and other iterations of non-alcoholic beers that are just as delicious and efficient when making them at home and deserve a place in the homebrewers brewing schedule.
Hop water. That was exactly one of the questions that I had. So, but before we go there, let's come back to hop water. I want to finish. So I missed your HomebrewCon presentation, but this guy did not. And he told me if I didn't listen to it, I was a fool.
I did.
He actually had a nicer word than that, but anyway, a more colorful word, more accurately. But you confessed there that y'all made a mistake. And we were just talking about it with Josh on how it was turned around. But do you now see it as an error you would not want to repeat is what I want to get back to. So can you explain exactly what happened and what you learned from it, and maybe your learning was a little different than what you expected?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think in this particular case, it was probably just a happy accident because we ended up with higher BUs, right? We went in a little earlier, we had more time to isomerize, but we ended up with a beer that was quite bitter. So here's what's good about that. That counteracted our malt sweetness. So we had a really nice, full, like what I would consider full flavored beer, because now we had to back up those 40 IBUs with some hop aroma. And we had a nice backbone and complex mouthfeel because of the malt bill that we chose. So I didn't think it ruined the beer. We just laughed because it was my error of being excited and just dumping them all in at once. But nonetheless, we didn't follow the recipe. So what would have happened if we would have added at 15? Well, we would have expected some sort of whirlpool-like or late addition hop interaction that would have contributed some type of hop aroma potentially and flavor, right? We didn't get that. So we counteracted that at the end. We ended up with a beer without the hop oil. That's why we added it. It didn't have a lot of those elements. So, I'll kind of go back to, yeah, it definitely impacted the recipe. I think it was a phenomenal beer. I think we're kind of adapting our recipe because we did it that way. And what our takeaway was the bitterness didn't hurt us. It helped us. It lended itself to a beer that was more, for a homebrew attempt, was very much like a very solid analog of an IPA. And that's what I would encourage people, like, don't give up on the mistakes, but just know that you may need to lean into some new or unusual ingredients to be able to counteract what's happening inside that beer.
So Josh back here is actually working on some sanitation. He's doing that while he's waiting on this to boil. Any recommendations, are there any differences in the sanitation protocols that we're used to? And for me, you just sanitize everything. But, we don't want infections. And is there a higher degree, an extra effort, make it more concentrated, use twice as much?
And I think it's good to ground it on brew house side and once packaged.
Yeah.
Those are two different things.
Okay. So what do you think, just like Josh is doing here, should he be taking any extra pains, using extra concentrated?
No, I mean, I think particularly if you're already a home brewer thinking about sanitization, you're in a great spot. Just you follow your normal protocols. No brewer's making a beer with the intention to put something in it that's going to infect the beer. So just making sure you're being extra cautious about that. Because the biggest difference is we lack microbiological protections against pathogens and bacterias because we don't have ethanol in there. The whole point of why it was originally considered safer than water, right? So when we lose that protection, I don't think any brewer is doing that with any intention. So no need to do anything extra. But on the packaging side, that was an area I always had issues as a home brewer brewing regular beer, was I didn't think about how I was sanitizing my packaging and my bottles, and I would ultimately end up with gushing beers and problems because I did something wrong on that side of things. So definitely mind those steps, and then you'll have just less issues. But I would say overall, you can don't be overly concerned with making an NA beer at home that's going to hurt you. I think as long as you follow the basic protocols of cleaning, where things really get dicey is if you're trying to serve it on draft. That's where I think people have really started to pay attention to what are some of the dangers of non-alcoholic beer. And I think that when you think about packaging, and you're packaging an unpasteurized product with very, very low alcohol in it into a keg and then trying to dispense it, well, then you have a lot of opportunity for this product to come into contact with something that can, then gain pathogenic elements or, biological infections and things in there that you wouldn't want that could potentially make you sick or hurt you. And that's applies to, from a food safety perspective, to anything that doesn't have alcohol in it, which is why we recommend managing pH. Why, if it's a commercially produced product, you should be chemically pasteurizing that product to guarantee there are no pathogens in there. And then if you're going to be adding it on draft, you need to clean it more often. It needs to be kept cold, and you really want to consume it in a relatively short amount of time. So on the home brewing side, if you're making this at home, you can definitely make a really safe and enjoyable product. Keep it cold. And try to drink it within, I'd say 8 to 10 weeks. And you should have absolutely no issues. You should be able to enjoy that non-alcoholic beer as if it was anything else that you brewed, just minding the fact that, hey, if I know I'm not really great at sanitizing my packaging equipment, pay attention to that. Yep. And look for the same markers of infection or anything like that. Those are the same aromas of vinegar, things of that nature that you should pick up on, because the other types of things that can develop, which we're more concerned about in draft, are odorless and tasteless anyway. which is why we just have to make it known that if you're going to be taking the risk of drinking a non-alcoholic beer on draft and you're not sure that's what that retailer or you're doing it at home, what those protocols are, that's where the increased risks happens. Really don't see it being as much of a threat on the production or even homebrew packaging side, as long as you're following normal sanitization and cleaning protocols.
And I want to jump in. There's the good tips you just shared. Cold, fresh, pasteurize. On the big level, it's tunnel pasteurization, flask pasteurization. Most homebrewers aren't thinking pasteurization.
Right.
And then if you're giving it as gifts, I mean, us homebrewers give as gifts, you need to say, drink it fresh or don't drink it. And you have to store it cold. Like, that's a big deal. So just following the trail of where your homebrew goes out into your network and space, making sure that's the last stopgap to just make people aware, because it's a food grade product. It's no longer beer because it doesn't have that level of alcohol, so it can turn, right? And so you need to think about the standard practices with that to be safer.
But is the risk any different than you look in the refrigerator and you've got a gallon of milk and it's past the date, but you open it, you smell it, you kind of swirl it, I think it's okay. I will do that. Is beer the same way? Are the risks similar? You know, because I really don't think I'm going to die from 10-day-old milk. Am I going to have any more likelihood? Is the risk any higher with NA beer than like another food product such as milk?
In this case, you're probably drinking milk that's been pasteurized. Right, so that's what it comes back to. Now, if this was raw milk from a farm, you're going to note a major difference in its degradation, just as we do anything else at home. So yes, in this case, if it's not been pasteurized, this is again why we recommend drinking it within this kind of standard freshness. Just letting it sit over time is exposing the opportunity for it to become temperature unstable, or for other things that are maybe slower growing to develop that could become problematic for you. Absolutely. But yes, milk has been pasteurized, so we've done that kill step at the point of packaging to make sure that there's nothing else able to grow as long as that container is closed. And then once you open it, it begins to degrade, then you're having normal problems with it, you know, just in making that decision, but unlikely to really hurt yourself. So yeah, same goes on this side. If you're drinking something that's unpasteurized, we just recommend you keep it cold and consume it within that sort of 2-month time frame to avoid just any potential for some long-term thing to kind of creep in.
So bottom line, although we can't really answer the question, the degree of additional risk, that pasteurization is key. And it is not practical for a home brewer to pasteurize. Does it change the whole flavor profile?
Yeah, I mean, it is. You could theoretically can pasteurize at home. You can make a hot bath. So
Tunnel pasteurization.
we can.
I've never done it.
Yeah, you can pasteurize by making a hot bath and dunking those bottles in there. Now you're going to have thermal degradation, which is a real challenge of it. You know, we compensate for that on the pro brewing side by increasing our ingredient load to compensate for that. But I mean, maybe that's a recommendation we consider as we go forward. If you really want that extra layer of protection as a home brewer, consider a hot bath on your NA. If you really want to go the extra mile, but you're going to change the flavor profile. Because we're exposing all of those ingredients to that hot temperature, and you're going to have, especially if it's a hoppy beer, you're going to have impact from that.
Well, Josh, let me say how much fun this was. I mean, this is great. I mean, this is something that's just hardly done, and few people know about it. And I just appreciate you taking the time, putting up with me and all the cameras and the live stream that we attempted, and it just didn't happen. But there's so much expertise in this room today, and I appreciate you allowing me to play 20 questions. Julia, it was fantastic to see you. Crispy, always a pleasure. Megan, you're a wealth of information, my God. And Josh, what a beautiful homebrew setup, and thank you for sharing it with us. Anybody got any closing comments? Julia, do you have a closing comment for Josh? Like to put you on the spot?
For Josh, thank you. Thanks for leading the way, and Megan, and reiterating on this recipe. I don't know if it's proprietary. Eventually, though, we'll want something that you both have constructed to test and sample on our own. I think it's uncharted territory. There is the safety factor. You have to remember that. We've said it kind of again and again throughout, but that doesn't mean you can't as the cutting edge aspect of NA comes along, follow best practices that hopefully are starting to get formulated, because we have to realize I can't point to all the best practices for this. That does make me nervous for home brewers. So if you're going to brew NA, you have to take it seriously. It's a food grade product. It's not about the quality difference. It's about food safety. And so regardless, I'm excited to try these beers, be as safe as I possibly can about it, and drink many of them. So thanks, Josh, for teaching us, and Megan too.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, same, Josh. I appreciate this to me validates all the stuff that we wanted to do at Aficionado, which is to normalize alcohol-free, non-alcoholic beer and other similar adult beverages for the homemaking, because there's a need for this. And I wish you the best of luck at Brewell, your new endeavor. And I know you're going to be including these types of beverages to your customers there, and you're an excellent brewer. And it was just an honor to be able to do this, and I hope we get to do it again next year.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, and as a home brewer, as I said early on, I'm really looking forward to getting that balance in life. And it's the 800-pound gorilla that's part of this hobby. People ask me, is there more alcoholism within the hobby? And I say, no, I think it's representative of the U.S. that we have alcoholics. We have people who are very responsible. And I want to be more responsible as I get older, and I feel my aches and pains more. So yes, that's gray, and that's a Medicare card in my wallet. So, just trying to do the right thing and still enjoy my beer. And the flavor, but do it in a more responsible way.
So, Josh, you're more than just NA beer. I know that, and I found this sticker. So, can you tell me about this? It looks like not only a brewery, but more. So, what are you up to as we wrap up?
Yeah.
So what is that?
Yeah, Brewell is a brewery tap room, like we kind of all know, but like has this wellness component with yoga studios and whatever under the same roof. So trying to keep that community in mind and keep them together, whether you drink alcohol or not. So it's, I think, having this robust menu of NA products, whether it's, beer or, the wine line and everything, but trying to keep those people from the wellness side that came with their friends, that they can now all collect in the tap room and keep them together for, what the reason they came for was your friendship and to be together. So I think it's my love of brewing, some low alcohol beers like the German and the Euro ales, which would be, the beers that I would have. And then also trying to dabble in, NA IPA to have my own brand. And then my wife's love is like the wellness side of things. And we said, hey, let's put it together, and we get to work together. And so, yeah, hopefully the end of next summer, Brewell will be open in Biltmore Village, and we'll go from there.
Well, we can brew some more beer, and then we can go there when we're done.
Yep, absolutely we can.
Okay, thanks, everybody. Cheers.
Cheers.